Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Red Gaming Tentacon video, we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up over the past 24 or so hours. We're going to be starting things out with Nvidia, because Jensen Huang has gone on record and told a room full of journalists that, well, just don't expect the new GeForce anytime soon. Oh dear. Meanwhile, Microsoft have purchased GitHub for $7.5 billion. I'm sure that that's going to please a lot of folks, or, not. And Apple have announced the iOS 12 feature set, and it looks to be very impressive, with up to 40% improvements in performance compared to the previous iOS. So when are we going to be seeing the next generation of GeForce graphics cards? It seems to be just an ongoing question at this point. We've heard a myriad of different rumours. Of course, the fact that GDDR6 is entering mass production, and the fact that we've heard Nvidia themselves announce that at Hotchips 30 there will be a discussion of the architecture of the next generation GeForce, did seem to tie into previous rumours that we would see the cards hit around the third quarter of this year. But perhaps there's more to it. Jensen Huang, in a press conference during about the time of Computex, was asked multiple times, perhaps the most obvious question in the history of humanity, hey, any hints when the next generation of GeForce cards are going to be out? Thanks. And unsurprisingly, he was somewhat tentative, but after constant questioning, he decided to give a little hint, and he said that, well, quite frankly, it's not going to happen anytime soon.
A little hint? It's a long time.
So, first of all, what does anytime soon actually mean? Well, it's a very open statement, isn't it? Like, for example, if you're waiting at a train station and you happen to notice that the next train, which was coming in 15 minutes, is cancelled, therefore the train after that is, let's say, 40 minutes time, well, that's a long time to wait. That's not anytime soon. But that's relatively not too long in the grand scheme of time, right? So perhaps August could be a genuine date that we do see the graphics cards. After all, anytime soon could mean, let's say, the next month or so. I mean, that could also make sense. The other way to look at it is that Nvidia could just decide, actually, yes, GDDR6 is ready. Yes, we're willing to talk about some of the basics of what we're doing with the architecture, but we're not willing at the moment to release the darn thing. And that could be for numerous reasons. It could be because they're shifting to a new process and perhaps they don't feel confident with the yield yet. Maybe they're still trying to iron that out. Maybe they're still feeling that they want to make sure that GDDR6 production is really high so that the costs aren't too much of an issue. Perhaps they want to see what's going on with the mining situation. Perhaps that they've got a large inventory of GTX 1080s or whatever else that they want to shift. After all, we have heard that they have put in a recent order for new silicon from TSMC, so perhaps they're trying to clear out back inventory of that. But it's rather curious because typically speaking, if you look at history, when Nvidia do talk about a new architecture at, let's say, Hotchips, generally speaking, the architecture is either released or is about to be released. Generally speaking, it has just been released. So it's usually a pretty good indicator to say, well, oh look, they're holding this conference discussing the architecture, therefore the architecture is already out. Therefore, it's really difficult to know what the hell Jensen actually is referring to with these comments. And the other possibility is he's just don't want to affect the sales of the current generation GeForces. After all, if he was to say, well, actually, we're going to be releasing them in the next week or two, obviously no one in the right mind, unless they hadn't heard the news, is going to be like, oh, the first thing I'm going to do is buy a new graphics card tomorrow. No, of course you're not going to do that. It's kind of difficult to know right now what to do, and it's very frustrating. Personally, I'm recording this a couple of days, well, not quite a couple of days, before AMD's Computex. I'm begging, just like, the universe at this point, that we hear something about a competitor to Nvidia. I'm not saying that AMD's graphics cards are bad at the moment. I'm just saying that above, let's say, the 1060 range, they can't really compete. They've got Vega, which is, it's not a bad card, but there's just numerous issues at the moment that AMD, they're just behind in the kind of upper echelons. And as I've said 1,000 times now, there's just too much of a gulf, too much of a gap between the 1060 before the 580s and Vega 56s. It's like Nvidia just have so many different cards. It's ridiculous how many cards Nvidia have released now. They've milked the GP102, the 104s and everything else to the point where if they were cow, they wouldn't even be on life support. They would literally be bones, and Nvidia would literally be grinding the bones to marrow so that they could get more out of it. That's pretty much the level Nvidia have gone to. And I don't blame them, because like, why wouldn't you? It's just, think of it this way. If you have silicon which is not quite good enough for a 1080 but way too good for a 1070, what would you do? Would you just be like, well, gee, I'm just gonna, limit these CUDA cores and just say no 1070? No, of course you're not. You're gonna say, well, hey, let's release a 1070 Ti or Ti or whatever the hell you want to call it, because it just makes logical sense. Well, frustration, thy name is Paul. Actually, no, wait, frustration, thy name is Gamers. Can you hear that? That's the sound of about 27 million people crying out in despair. That's right. Microsoft have acquired GitHub for $7.5 billion US, which is an insane amount of cash. Just for your FYI, they were last valued at $2 billion back in 2015. But with millions of repositories of code, GitHub, which is essentially social media for programmers in some ways, is perhaps one of the most well-known sites in the tech communities, but Microsoft have now purchased it. Now, why have they done this? Well, 6 months ago, GitHub were actually looking at the idea, the notion of deciding to go with an IPO, but they were, quote, impressed with Satya Nadella and his embrace of open source technology. I'm gonna stifle laughter. I don't know, like Microsoft, in a way they have, to be fair to them. But anyway, they were impressed by Satya Nadella, and now pretty much they've sold all of their stock to Microsoft.
This didn't necessarily come out of the blue though. Microsoft's desire to purchase was heard last week, but there had been years of prior conversations, and in some instances there were also discussions of perhaps more of a partnership, but we now have both Bloomberg and Business Insider with multiple reports. So to give you an idea of the size here, GitHub has 27 million users and 80 million repositories of code. Microsoft, of course, are one of the top contributors, but there are more than 1,000 employees total adding code to repositories from Microsoft. The CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, has actually released a statement. Microsoft is a developer-first company, and by joining forces with GitHub, we strengthen our commitment to developer freedom, openness, and innovation. We recognize the community's responsibilities we take on with this agreement, and we will do our best to empower every developer to build, innovate, and solve the world's most pressing challenges. So what's going to happen with the management structure that's currently in place at GitHub? Well, the Microsoft Corporate Vice President, Nat Friedman, who is the founder of Zimmerman and also an open source veteran, will actually assume the role of the CEO of GitHub. And meanwhile, its current CEO, Chris Wanstrath, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, will become a Microsoft Technical Fellow, and he will report to the Executive Vice President, Scott Guthrie, and he will work on strategic software initiatives. The outgoing president actually said that, and I quote, "I'm very proud, extremely proud actually, of what GitHub and our community have accomplished over the past decade, and I can't wait to see what lies ahead. The future of software development is bright, and I'm thrilled to be joining forces with Microsoft to help make it reality. Their focus on developer lines up perfectly with our own, and their scale, tools, and global cloud will play a huge role in making us even more valuable for developers everywhere," end quote.
So what are my thoughts on this? Well, to be honest with you, from Microsoft's perspective, I can definitely understand the logic of doing it. And despite my jokes a few moments ago, Microsoft have made certain moves to embrace open source technologies. And as a company, it does make an awful lot of sense for them to do so, because open source ultimately is a driving factor of the industry. And I will say that a lot of the changes, and this is just my personal opinion, that they've done to Azure and even Windows, I do quite like. But my personal opinions aren't necessarily relevant. Of course, The real story here is that GitHub does have a couple of big competitors, and with a lot of dissent on social media, the question is Microsoft's investment going to harm the company? Are we just going to see a thing where Microsoft just kind of drive folks to other platforms, and thus the actual platform that they've invested in will lose support? Well, unfortunately, it's very difficult to predict the future. Of course, knee-jerk reactions are always a thing in the industry, and it's possible that if Microsoft does this well and they just simply add support and have kind of a relatively hands-off approach and just do what they need to maintain the platform, but perhaps add a small amount of features, perhaps the platform will grow and continue to thrive. It's going to be curious over the next 12 to 24 months how folks actually embrace this, particularly when you consider that the code base that is held on the website is just gargantuan, and it's not just, of course, for applications which are necessarily written for Microsoft. They're written for just about everyone. And so it's going to be curious to see how all of this happens over the next several months, let alone a couple of years. So the big announcement from Apple today was iOS 12, which of course follows along from iOS 11. But I have to say, iOS 12 looks very impressive. There are numerous features and performance improvements that Apple are introducing within the new iOS. First things first, what about compatibility? Well, the good news is, if your device is compatible with iOS 11, then you're good to go. iOS 12 will and certainly work with your device. Performance improvements are also very impressive. If you believe Apple, they're touting up to a 40% improvement over the previous generation iOS, which is very impressive. I mean, that is just pretty damn good, right? It's free performance. And of course, because iOS is tailored to specific devices in the Apple family, you can, of course, imagine that they are going to maximize what is available on your hardware. So in theory, at least, the SoC for your specific phone is going to be utilized to its fullest.
iOS augmented reality is going to become even more well supported with iOS 12 because they are going to be embracing a new file format called USDZ, or Z if you prefer. It allows you to experience a wide variety of AR experiences using AR and will be compatible with a whole bunch of different applications and services. These include most of Adobe's suite, Autodesk, as well as the web itself. Apple are also improving the photo functionality with iOS 12. Of course, Apple have certainly been a lot better with the search bar in the application. For example, you can type in a certain thing, be it, let's say, a car, and it will show any relevant photos of that particular object in your library, obviously utilizing machine learning. And also they're going to be introducing a new For You tab, and this will allow you to share memorable photos, which you can share with others. And it's a little bit like Assistant from Google Photos, at least to a degree. Siri is also getting a rather large set of improvements. If you are running late for a meeting, Siri will actually ask you if you would like to send a message to other folks involved in that meeting to let them know, hey, you're going to be late. I have to admit, I think that's actually a really cool feature. And since it's a digital age, you can probably guess one of the other big features, and that is communication improvements. One of the large ones that I personally noticed was FaceTime improvements, and this will allow you to make group FaceTime calls, which is a very, very, very long-awaited feature. It's probably one of the more requested feature sets that Apple could have provided, and it does so in a big way. It actually supports up to 32 people and is actually integrated directly with the Messages app, so users can jump in and out of group FaceTime calls when you so desire. Now, what about the release date for this thing? Well, according to Apple, iOS 12 will be available in the fall for all 64-bit devices. There is not a specific release date, but it won't be too long. Now, don't get me wrong, I am more of an Android type of person, but I have to say iOS 12 does sound pretty damn cool, and I like some of the features here. And if nothing else, even if the other functionality is not particularly impressive to you, the performance improvements definitely are. And it is definitely one of the benefits of actually creating and releasing software for your own device. The very fact of the matter is, of course, Apple know every single device configuration that they are going to target, and therefore, much like Sony, for example, with the PlayStation 4, or Microsoft, the Xbox One, or what have you, they can make sure that with their development kits and their software, they can squeeze every last ounce of performance out of their particular device.
Anyway, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. Normal stuff, like, share, comment, subscribe, ring the bell icon, because apparently sometimes it does stuff, and that would be amazing. For all of that said, what are your thoughts, especially on the Nvidia situation? Do you think that this is Jensen just pretty much saying it, or do you think that perhaps there was originally plans to release it in Q3 and maybe they've just pushed it back again for whatever reason? Perhaps, you know, they just don't feel there's enough competition. Perhaps they feel that mass production of GDDR6 isn't enough. Perhaps, you know, whatever reason. Let me know in the comments below. With all of that said, hopefully you have enjoyed yourself. And, well, I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.